Hokie Hangover. Happy New Year. Did you guys enjoy the playoff games today?
I enjoyed one of them.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah. It's the much hyped up Ohio State Oregon game did not end up being what we thought it would, but shout out to Kenny Dillingham and Arizona State, man. I mean, they put up a tough fight. I know Mr. LeBlue here was not a fan of the lack of a targeting call there that would have
Yeah.
effectively given Arizona State the chance to kick a reasonable
So
field goal to win the game.
I'm going to go on
Nothing's
a
reasonable with that
soapbox.
kicking
Uh,
operation.
uh,
Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, I'm going to go on a soapbox really quick, and then I want to have a serious note. Um, like, just take it out of the game. In all seriousness, I
Yes.
mean,
Yes. Yes. Yep.
like, guys know what they're signing up for. We're compensating these guys now. I'm so, and Andrew and I were chatting about this before we pressed record. There's no consistency in the implementation and interpretation of these judgment calls across conferences, across like crews within conferences.
Mm-hmm.
So pass interference, targeting, I mean, sometimes holding, blocks in the back, all of those calls are wildly inconsistent from game to game and from conference to conference and crew to crew. And we have enough of those issues already that those are rules we can't really take out of the game. And I understand player safety is a concern. But if player safety is supposed to be the number one concern, and we're going to let guys lead with the helmet and then hit a defenseless player in the helmet and not throw the flag, then we have completely lost the meaning of the rule here, and we might as well just get rid of it out of the game. Um, Now, if you guys have any commentary on that, go ahead and do it now. But if you haven't, I want to
I,
put a serious
I,
note out there really quick.
no, I agree. Uh, Targeting it's got a good intention. The rule's got a good intention. In practice, it's really hard. Like it's really hard. We can blame the officials. A lot of times we do for getting these calls right, getting these calls wrong, whatever. We review all these calls.
And they
I think
still
week
can't
to
get them
week,
right.
it's like,
They slow it
well,
down to like 2 frames per 0.5 seconds, and they still
because
can't get the calls right.
to your point, the criteria for what is targeting it seems to be different from crew to crew across these different conferences. One crew maybe puts an emphasis on, okay, was the receiver defenseless? The other one will put a emphasis on whether or not they were launching with the crown of the helmet. I think the one in this Arizona State Texas game today, his head was up. I think letter of the law, that is the way that everybody is taught to tackle, but he hit him with the crown of the helmet still, right? So like this is called targeting by a handful of officiating crews everywhere every week. The issue is that it's also not called targeting for a handful of officiating crews everywhere every week, right? Like that's the real problem. There's no consistency in how it's called. It's for one crew it's leading with the crown of the helmet and launching into the defenseless player. For the other it's there is a 50-50 tackle where it might be targeting, might not be, but the receiver was defenseless, so let's throw him out of the game and cost him, the second half or the first half next week if it was, this was taking place in the second half of the game. It's ridiculous. I mean, the targeting's ridiculous. And I understand the intention. It's a good intention. But Ricky, you made a really good point. These guys are getting paid a lot of money now, a lot of them. And at this point, it's like, you know what you're signing up for. You're getting paid a lot of money. Does that mean that you should be, subject to serious head injuries? No. But these 50-50 BS calls, like, guy coming downhill with his head up, making a good hard nosed tackle, a lot of times is getting flagged for targeting. Today it wasn't. I was actually okay with them not calling targeting there. That was fine with me. The issue that I have is that it's not consistent week to week. So I would just take it out of the game entirely and let's just go play football. Like, let's go play football. If it's egregious and it's clear that somebody is trying to hurt someone else, and it's when it's egregious, we know it, right? When it's actually targeting and everybody's on board that it's targeting, we know it. This 50-50 BS happens most of the time, though, and that's what these guys are getting thrown out of games for. It's crazy.
Yeah, something's got to be done to try and figure out why they can't figure this out. On a serious note, or Andrew, go ahead.
No, I mean, I agree with everything you guys are saying there. It was just, ultimately, I think consistency is going to be the key. I just don't like the situation that in this playoff and the opportunity for what would have been like the only like true major upset. And, we can go on and on about how Cinderella stories are unlikely to happen in this era of college football, in this format, the way that they have it. But that would have been a story, and you had an excellent game. But at the end of the excellent game, ultimately the chatter is something that comes down to a judgment call that, to your point, Ricky, like, is just simply not judged the same way, game over game, week over week, in the sport at large. And I think that does injustice, especially on what is the largest stage, for college football. And if you want to like grow and expand the game, and I know a lot of you guys out there listening are like, I don't care about what the normies think. But like the reality is, like, they don't have this problem in the NFL, right? Like, so if you're trying to grow college football, if you're trying to get it to be more popular, doing this on the biggest stage in the most meaningful game of the season is probably not the way to do it.
Yeah. One thing here from Mile High Hokie: refs make $2,000 to $3,000 a game. Get them real training and pay them. It's $1 billion industry. Get better officiating. This is a problem for both college and the NFL, actually, that these refs are not full time, and that I don't think that they're getting the training that they need. But I'm not seeing that that's getting fixed anytime soon. Before we move on to the Duke's Mayo Bowl, Mike, you mentioned whether or not we liked the bowl games that we got to see today, the playoff games. We should put a note there. There were only 2 games played today, and there's a reason for that. For all the folks down in New Orleans that were affected by the terrorist attack for New Year's Eve, just absolutely tragic and mind-boggling. And certainly keeping them in our thoughts and our prayers, and send all of our condolences to all those folks. And the same goes for what looked to be an apparent attack in Las Vegas today as well. Just an awful time, but certainly totally fine with them moving the game, and hopefully they can get the game going tomorrow without any issues. But certainly a scary situation down there, and I know that all 3 of us are certainly going to be thinking about the folks that were affected.
Yeah, I mean, it especially hits home given that, you could see a situation where, ourselves or, people that we're close with, people who are traveling down to New Orleans to celebrate and attend the game that was supposed to be played today, obviously will be played tomorrow now. Like, it just, to wake up to that news on, what was supposed to be a celebratory day. It's the first day of the year, new leaf, and to see, reemergence of a terrorist threat that, has ultimately been somewhat quiet over the course of the last couple of years. Not the way we wanted to kick things off. So prayers up for the people of New Orleans, and of course, our deepest condolences to those affected.
Yeah, nothing really left to add. It's awful. I mean, it's just, it's terrible.
Yeah, so it is. Hopefully they're able to make sure that the stadium and the surrounding area is secure for tomorrow, and hopefully we don't have any issues. On a lighter note, let's go ahead and get into this Duke's Mayo Bowl game. Guys, I must say that I'm thoroughly excited to see the prospect of Brent Pry getting bathed in mayonnaise. I think that is a hilarious image that quite honestly, I think he owes the fan base. I think that this is something that he needs to give to us.
I mean, yeah. I mean, the season by and large sucked. So if we can end it with him getting mayonnaise dumped on him with a bowl victory with basically all of the 2s and the 3s playing, that would be enjoyable.
Not just mayo, guys. This is the best mayo that America has to offer, okay? Like that's only the best for this situation.
Okay, so if we do win, maybe a new T-shirt idea. I donated 25% of my salary to Triumph NIL, and all I got was this lousy picture of the head coach being doused in mayo. But I just workshopping it at this point. But no, it would be obviously, as I said last time, right? Like, I'll never apologize for being happy the team won after we beat UVA. Despite the season overall, I'll never apologize for being happy that my alma mater won a football game. And I'll never apologize for getting a little bit excited for a bowl game and just having fun with it. It's win, lose, or draw. Virginia Tech football is a cultural phenomenon in my life and in the lives of so many. And if you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you certainly agree. It's fun to be a fan at times, and we're going to have some fun in my town and the very room that this podcast is being recorded from right now will be the pregame party tailgate site for myself, Mr. McDaniel, producer Scott, Ricky LeBlue, who will not be partaking in the level of indulgence that Mr. Savino and Mr. McDaniel and myself will, because he is an honorable man going to the press box. But Ricky will be there too, and some of our other friends, Matei, Sis, 247 Sports is going to pop by. He'll be crashing on my couch for saying on Saturday. It's always gonna be great to see everyone, and with the Blacksburg folks, everyone gets to come to my turf, my neck of the woods now. So that's pretty awesome.
I am looking forward to getting in the car with producer Scott in about 36 hours and beginning the trek to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I will be arriving with Scott early afternoon on Friday.
Who's driving?
Scott's driving.
That's a scary thought, Scott. If you're listening,
Scott's driving.
Well, you guys are, to be fair, for those who are wondering about scary thought, they are staying in a hotel the night of the game.
Yes.
So
we are. Yes.
It's just getting there.
Yes, just getting there.
You guys can RPS who takes the wheel on the drive back. That might not be the most fun that you've ever had in your entire life.
Hopefully, you guys have a late checkout.
I've had more enjoyable drives home. I work for Sports Illustrated on Saturday night until midnight, so pray for me on that front. I'm going to be very tired.
Andrew, I mentioned this before we recorded.
Yeah, we literally talked about this.
Lo and behold, look at this.
Clark, text me. I'll give you the information about the party.
Did I or did I not mention that we should invite Clark?
Yes, 100%. Now that I know, honestly, if you're listening to this podcast and you're someone that I know even kind of well, hit me up. You can come to the party. Why not?
Now, if you don't know Andrew particularly well, or any of us particularly well, and you still want to meet us, send the pod a DM and we can maybe organize something at the stadium.
Yes. Unfortunately, there is limited space in the apartment, which, despite the booming success of the Hokie Hangover podcast, I do still live in just a solo apartment. So
Andrew's not quite in the penthouse yet. That comes
not quite in the penthouse just yet. We will have plenty of space to party, but
subscribe to the YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube.
Please.
I mean, the way I look at it is,
party.
Jeremy Counts, if you're listening, which I know you are because you sponsor this tremendous project, it sounds like the only way we're going to get Andrew into a penthouse is if we further the success of this podcast. So, to Jeremy, I look to you.
Please tell your friends to sponsor the podcast too. Now, Jeremy. By the way, speaking of Jeremy Counts, I highly recommend everyone watch the most recent episode of Blacksburg on the Rocks, where Jeremy did a little bit of call it a sketch.
Did he actually publish that?
Yeah, no, it's up.
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, no, you gotta check it out, Ricky. Mike, have you seen it yet?
I have not. I
both of you guys are in for a treat.
I heard
both of you guys are in for a treat.
Maybe Mike and I need to watch it together and then record our reaction and then put that on the YouTube page.
Live reaction. Live reaction show as it happens, like as we're like right after fresh off reviewing it, live reaction show.
Yes, love it. Anyway, let's preview this bowl game. How about that?
Let's rock.
Tech's missing a lot of players. This is it's a bit of an issue. I don't know that this is an exhaustive list, but in terms of guys that are like contributing players, Aeneas Peebles, Antoine Power Island, Dorian Strong, Mansour Delane, Mose Phillips, Kelly Lawson, Sam Brumfield. On offense, Xavier Chaplin, Braylon Moore, Daquan Felton, and Jalen Lane. These are the guys that I think we're pretty sure are not playing. Are there any ones that I'm missing on that list?
Did you mention Dorian Strong and Mansour Delane, Keontae Jenkins,
Did
APR?
not mention Keontae. Is Keontae not playing?
Keontae is an opt-out there.
Okay.
Jalen Jones injured. No Felton, no Tootin. We're assuming no Lane. Of course, half the offensive line. From what my good friend and colleague Doug Bowman put out, it looks like 16 of 22 of the season starters will not be partaking in this one.
All right. So Minnesota by 20? I'm just kidding.
I mean, I predicted at the end, but
Well, I mean, so let's talk about this first. We can start with Pop Watson, I think, because he's going to be the starter for this game. Colin Schley is supposed to play. In what capacity, I'm not entirely sure, but it looks like Pop's going to get the start here. Are we worried at all about this game and playing behind what's likely going to be a pretty green offensive line and kind of a lack of experienced weapons at receiver? Are we worried about how that may or may not impact his development going into the offseason?
No, he'd have to get really hurt, which I guess is what you're asking.
No,
Like,
not
he has
even
a
that
bad game in the
necessarily.
bowl game.
I'm more thinking of it from a confidence perspective of, he played so well against Virginia, and there were, and I obviously, was one of the ones leading the charge there. I'm praising his performance in that game. If he were to come out in this one missing, half his guys, and he doesn't play as well, maybe he takes a beating. Are we worried at all that may impact what he can do into this January and eventually into spring practice?
I'm not, only because like Pop's human, right? So I mean, he's gonna say all the right stuff in the media, but like behind closed doors, he's gonna look at this, and especially behind the offensive line, he's going to be playing behind on Friday. He's going to look at this and be like, "This is not the 5 guys who I'm going to be under center, if I'm the starter next year, or even if I'm playing, in place of Drones, whatever. If I'm taking snaps of the first team offense next year, this is not the starting 5 up front that is going to be blocking for me in all likelihood next year. Could a few of those guys be, in the fold? Of course, right? Like Johnny Garrett is probably going to play here. Could he be in the fold on the offensive line next year? Absolutely, he could, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, some of these guys are going to be, cycling in on the offensive line some way, shape, or form, maybe even holding down a starting spot. But like Pop's human, right? If he goes out and doesn't play well, and he goes, well, I played with a bunch of really green receivers and, an offensive line where like there's like a handful of starts combined across the entire unit going into this bowl game. All right, I went 10 of 27 for 106 yards, a touchdown, and 3 picks. And I was running for my life. I was sacked 6 times. Hopefully, we have a more cohesive unit up front in the spring into next fall. So I'm not worried about it really from that standpoint. I don't want any major injuries here, right? Of course, I would love to win the bowl game. I want Tech to be competitive. But just like looking at it for what it is, and, Tech missing upwards of 16 of their 22 regular starters in this game, you kind of look at it as another opportunity really for development of the young players who could contribute next year. Like that's how I'm going to be viewing it from the stands on Friday nights. Like which one of these guys up front at receiver, at running back, in the secondary, on the lines. Like, who's going to make an impact next year? Who's going to be a guy who maybe we don't, have circled right now, but, could be competing for a starting job or a spot in the 2 deep in the spring? Like that's kind of what I'm interested in watching this game Friday, because I think that's kind of how we have to view it versus the Military Bowl last year, where we went into it and we were like, all right, everybody's playing, so let's roll. Like,
Yeah.
Tulane probably looked at it a lot differently. Coach left, quarterback opted out. They're probably looking at it the same way we're probably looking at it right now from the Virginia Tech side a year later.
And that kind of goes right into this question I was going to ask later from Mile High Hokie. Is this game more about getting the win or developing and evaluating players for next season?
Well, first things first, to just answer your previous question. If Pop Watson is so thrown off by a bad performance in a bowl game where he's without half the team, he probably doesn't have the mental fortitude required to succeed in general. Now, I'm not saying that I think that would be the case, but it's just like a reality on the ground. You were QB3 all year. You're coming in and get the opportunity to play in the bowl game. Show us what you got. You've done that before. Obviously, the ride of the confidence that he probably has from the UVA game, it'd be great if you could continue that. But, in football, especially when you play the most important position on the field, like, you're playing the cards that are dealt. Now, to answer Mile High Hokie's question, and Mile High, thank you for the question, and thank you for being a consistent listener here. This game is definitely more about developing and evaluating players, I would say. I mean, if that's what you're going in, this game serves a multitude of purposes, right? Number one, it gives us the opportunity to, in the post-holiday season, get the fans back together, enjoy the game. It's a little bit of a privilege for, teams that otherwise had you call it a good season. I know a lot of you don't think it was a good season, but you went 500, so you're playing a bowl game. Do I wish that bowl games? Do I wish it was 2010? Yeah, of course I wish it was 2010, and this game mattered, and every single guy on the field is suiting up, and we get a real view of if Virginia Tech had played a meaningful regular season game against Minnesota, what would it look like? That's not what we're getting. But what we do get is an opportunity to see the guys that are going to be on the field for next year. I mean, one thing, if you look at the transfer portal, Virginia Tech has not targeted the wide receiver room very much. What does that imply? When you have finite resources, and in Virginia Tech's case, a multitude of problems, you allocate your resources towards where you think those problems are most glaring. Wide receiver room does not look like priority numero uno for them. They like what they have in the room. With the exception of Aiden Green, we have not seen a lot of those guys in that room play meaningful snaps for Virginia Tech football. You get a little bit of a preview there. What do I think is the most important part overall? Possibly the additional practices. Possibly the additional practices.
The most important part. That's the most important part, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and right. So, heck yeah, to the fact that this game is being played on, January the 3rd, right? Because that's even more additional time that these guys get to spend, as opposed to if you're going like the R&L Carriers New Orleans Bowl and season ends, you play your bowl game and it's over, right? So that's probably the most important part. Not just the actual experience in the game, because yes, I mean, that experience is meaningful, but it's one game. But it's the 15 some odd practices of getting Pop Watson and getting, even a guy like a Brody Adams running with the ones. Mm-hmm. That matters. And that's the kind of stuff that in a very important year for Virginia Tech next year and Brent Pry, where you're going to be leaning, though you'll do the best you can in the transfer portal, you're going to be leaning on development if you want to take a big step forward, or a step forward at all, or even just accomplish what you accomplished the last 2 seasons. It's going to require some development. So getting those additional formalized team events is, I'm sure Brent Pry would consider it to be priceless.
A lot of guys, too, real quick note, this has been a really cool bowl season in terms of, like, a lot of guys, well, more guys who have NFL aspirations have played in the non-playoff bowls. Think that's going to continue to swing kind of back in the direction it used to be. Not entirely, of course, but a lot of these guys in their contracts are signing, like in this new rev share era, right? A lot of these contracts guys are signing have something in there about bowl bonuses. So, guys who have been opting out, which this is in Virginia Tech's case, this is a lot of the guys who are opting out that haven't transferred, that are just moving on to the NFL draft or whatever and starting to like prepare. A lot of these guys aren't going to be obviously high picks in the NFL draft from Virginia Tech's roster. Like those guys are staying in college, transferring elsewhere, whatever. Those guys that are going to be like 5th through 7th round picks, or maybe even go undrafted, that aren't playing in this bowl game or just moving on, I think are going to be incentivized in future years by their NIL deal or their rev share deal with the school to potentially play in a bowl game, make a little bit more money, get a bigger bonus at the end of the year, right? Because there's like bonuses that are attached to these contracts. It's just something to watch. It's never going to be like it used to be, right? Because a lot of top NFL guys, right, are getting ready for the draft. They're not playing in the playoff. But I think it's going to swing back in the other direction, which is cool because a lot of these, there have been a lot of impact players that I think ordinarily would have opted out that have played in this bowl season. And the bowl season itself, like the games have been pretty good. Like the non-playoff bowl games this bowl season, by and large, have been awesome. Like there have been a lot of really good games. So I'm hoping it kind of continues that way, and I think it will at least swing back in that direction momentarily until the next college football comet hits Earth.
Yeah, I think for me the more interesting part of it is seeing some of these guys that are currently on the roster and are going to be taking on bigger roles than they have all season, that have guys that are already coming in through the portal in their position group. So I look at a guy like Quentin Reddish, who Virginia Tech has added 5 defensive backs, 3 safeties in this cycle. Quentin Reddish has a chance to kind of make his claim to be the first guy in spring ball over some of these more experienced transfers. So for him, this is an opportunity for him to kind of put his name on the map going into the offseason. Same thing goes for a guy like Dante Lovett, who did that a little bit in the regular season with some strong performances, but there are still some guys at corner that are going to be challenging him in the spring. So he has an opportunity to kind of try and get a leg up on those guys as they head into spring practice. And the same thing goes for some of these offensive linemen now that Virginia Tech's got 2 guys coming in who figure to be at least one of them is figuring to start, which is Remack, and then Altuner, who at least I think will end up in the 2 deep.
Yeah. The bowl practices are huge in Virginia Tech's case, especially just with the state of the roster and the amount of veterans Tech had on the roster coming into this year and how young they're going to be on paper heading into next year. The bowl practices are just so important. So I think the most important part of bowl season and this upcoming bowl game has already happened, right? To Andrew's point, it's been the practices that a lot of these young guys have gotten, the reps they've gotten with the 1s and the 2s that they probably ordinarily weren't getting in the regular season. That's happened already. The development piece has happened, right? In through these practices, which is really important, right? That the added reps. The bowl game itself, to answer Mile High Hokie's question, kind of circling back there, is the game more about getting a W or evaluating players for 25? I think it's the second part, but you'd love to get a win. Like these guys are coaching to win the game, The more important part is probably the development piece, just because you do know you're going into this game with a bunch of really young players and you kind of have to see it for what it is, I think, if you're the coaching staff. But these guys are going to compete and try to win this football game, obviously, right? And I don't think Mile High Hokie was insinuating that either, right?
Yeah.
But I just want to point that out there. I mean, they would love to go out and win this game, but I think the more important part, just given the state of the roster, I think, is the development, the extra bowl practices, and the game reps here are going to be really important too. Getting these guys game reps that haven't ordinarily played, like that is going to be important, even though it's a bowl game. You're going up against an opponent that won't have all of their best guys out there, but will still have some impact players. So, yeah, I think all of it's important, but I think the bowl practices have already happened are probably the most impactful piece, and it's good that a lot of these young guys have gotten that opportunity.
So I'll transition that to what we're saying, right? Like, we're seeing the opportunity that some of these younger guys have in front of them. Who are you most excited to watch? Who do you have your eye on? You know, when we're looking at from the angle of our seats, what number is Mike McDaniel and Ricky LeBlue going to be cued in on? Play over play.
I guess I'll pick one on each side of the ball. On offense, it's probably Pop Watson. I'm really curious to see how composed he is when he's going to be facing a lot of pressure in this game. One thing I wanted to get to before we wrapped up today was that Minnesota's pass rush isn't all that effective. That they've been a relatively strong defense for most of the year, but they don't rush the passer particularly well. However, with Virginia Tech missing half their offensive line, I am curious to see how Pop handles that. And then on defense, I know I mentioned Quentin Reddish, so I guess I'll go with a guy like Asen Stevens, who has seen the field some at defensive end, probably figures to be one of the rotational guys, if not a starter, in 25. How does he play in this game, especially where Minnesota is missing, I believe, their left tackle in this game, which is an opportunity for Asen to kind of put his name on the map as well.
Yeah, running back, if Tyler Mason gets reps, like he's gotten into games and blowouts or when Virginia Tech's been banged up at running back, and he's looked pretty good, very minimal reps. If he gets in and gets any sort of significant snaps here, I would like to see how he looks. But then taking into account the offensive line situation, I don't want to kind of, I don't know, blow that out of proportion if it doesn't go well, right? But he's a player I do want to keep an eye on. Defensively, Dante Lovett's been good in a rotational role. How good is he over a full game? I would like to see that. So that's a little bit of a cop-out because we've already seen him this year, obviously, and he's played significant snaps, but I would like to see him like in a full game. How does he look? Because, you know, I do think he's going to be one of the two starting quarterbacks next year. So I would just like to see how that looks over the course of a full game. Quentin Reddish, Ricky, you mentioned him earlier, and he's rotated in some this year. Virginia Tech's been so banged up at safety, he was kind of forced to play. I thought you made a really good point about, you know, his opportunity to stake his claim as one of the top guys heading into the spring at that position, even though Virginia Tech has recruited the heck out of cornerback and safety. It's pretty clear they're trying to get some experience in their room for at the very least competition for Reddish, including his brother, for what it's worth. But, yeah,
I think his brother plays corner, right?
His brother, I think, plays corner. He's also played nickel too. So
interesting.
I don't know. We'll see. It kind of depends.
So he might kind of move around a little bit.
Kind of depends on where they see Quentin Reddish next year too, I suppose. Anyway, yeah, those are the few guys I'm gonna keep an eye on. And then Pop. I mean, Pop's an obvious answer, so I try to go with somebody else.
Yeah, for me, I'm just along the offensive line, right? I'll be checking out PFF grades afterwards. It's like basically in a game of how cooked are we for next year? Like, if you,
Come on, dude.
Oh man.
And then Brody Adams, Take Heath, like Chance Wiggins if he gets a chance. It's it's kind of those younger producers. But I'm going to be focused on offense. But I like the Dante Lovett point because it's a guy that we've always been really excited about. Has shined a little bit in limited opportunities, but the whole game, a very different thing.
For sure. One more thing before we touch on Minnesota really quick. Can we read anything, this from Mile High again, can we read anything into Bud Foster's involvement, particularly beyond the bowl game? I have no inside knowledge on this, so take this for what it's worth. I am very skeptical of all rumors that Bud Foster will be on an official role on this staff next year. I have a feeling that given Virginia Tech's staff being kind of gutted with the defensive coordinator leaving, losing your linebackers coach, Sean Quinn is going to be calling plays in this game. I have a feeling that Brent kind of asked a favor for Bud to maybe help him out with some prep, maybe get an experienced, a veteran set of eyes up in the booth, which is where he's going to be on Friday, to kind of get an idea of what's happening out there. I certainly hope that that is the case. Mike and I broached this briefly on the last pod. I'm a huge Bud Foster fan. I have stand for Bud Foster for quite a while. Bud does not need to come back in any sort of official capacity. I think what he does now is more than enough, being an unofficial or official ambassador for the program in general. So kind of cool that he's coming back for a game to just kind of help things out and see if he can grease the skids a little bit. But I would not expect there to be anything next season.
It's a good guy to have in the room. For those of you who didn't listen to the last pod or didn't watch us the other night, it's a good guy to have in the room when you're teaching a lot of fundamentals in these bowl practices to young guys who don't have a lot of reps. Like, who better to learn from than Bud Foster? I don't have any inside knowledge here either. I would be pretty surprised if it extended beyond this bowl game. I think,
and even
it's just
I think it was Fuga that was asked about it in one of the media availabilities, and he said that it was kind of a cool moment for him to be able to see Bud being coaching guys once again. And I'm sure that some of the younger guys who were probably recruited by Bud in an unofficial capacity, we're probably feeling the same way.
Yeah. I mean, hell, like, Fuga's been around the program so long. Like,
he's a Fuente guy.
He basically came in right around the time Bud left. So I mean, it's crazy. About a year or two difference there.
Yeah, I mean, to that I say, maybe to the contrary, if it was that easy of a call to make, if Bud Foster's someone that you have on the line, and you're Brent Pry, he clearly has an itch for it enough to immediately take up that offer, and you've struggled with things like in-game coaching adjustments,
well,
if that's someone who's willing to take your calls, yeah, I think it might be someone that is being spoken to. Now, do I think Bud Foster is going to be the defensive coordinator next year? No. But if he's willing to help, accept the help, because we need help.
I was going to say, so if I know that we have blown completely over what we thought this pod would last, which is no surprise. If I'm Brent Pry and Bud comes to me and says, let me help, put me somewhere, I'm not saying no.
Right.
If I'm Brent Pry, I'm entering a absolutely critical year for my future in the sport, quite honestly. And I have a vacancy at defensive coordinator. I have a vacancy at linebackers coach. I do have who seems to be a bit of an up-and-coming coach in Xavier Debe, obviously a Tech alum. But if I have Bud Foster like putting his hand out and saying, put me somewhere and use me, I'm not saying no. I'm probably getting together with Witt and my director of football ops and trying to find a way to get him involved, whether it be in an analyst role or if he wants to actually get back on the field and coach again. Because knowing Bud, I'm sure that itch is still there because he's a pretty fiery guy. I just don't see that happening, though.
Look, say what you will about Brent Pry. I've never viewed him as a man who, at least in his time coaching Virginia Tech, has exuded any level of arrogance, my way or the highway type stuff.
Clearly not, because he wouldn't have fired these coaches this off season if he thought that
Yeah.
way. That was the issue with the old staff.
Brent does not have the ego that the other Brent had. Very, very two different Brents.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that reference almost escaped me there, Rick. But
Yes,
it's a Buzz Williams reference.
I had to pull out his legal name, the name his mother called him.
Yep. It was fun to watch that live. Watch the light bulb come on for Andrew. He was like, "Oh,
Very, very different personalities for Brent and Brent.
No kidding. No kidding.
So, go ahead, Andrew.
No, I was going to say, like, to wrap the point, like, it seems like Pry, especially at this juncture, would be open to that kind of stuff. And I eagerly await to see what happens and how it works out and what, if any, role Bud Foster has. And I would assume that if he is in any sort of role, it's not going to be, like, super formalized. But, I want to be hearing through the grapevine that Bud Foster is at least somewhat involved.
If he wants an office next door and he's going to be like an advisor and he's going to like look at scouting reports and if he's going to be in the film room, I am 100% taking that offer without question.
And you know what? Bud Foster's a career Virginia Tech guy. Like, you think he enjoys watching this shit?
No.
The way that it's gone the last decade?
He's got a seat. He's got a seat in the lower bowl, just like a bunch of people that listen to this show. I mean, he's there for every home game. He's glad handing folks in the tailgate lots. Like, Bud is a fan. I mean, he's who also happens to be a legendary football coach, but he is certainly a fan of Virginia Tech.
Yeah, and a football guy through and through, who I'm sure is, as he's watching Rutgers run the same pass play 7 times for an average of 10 yards,
I can only
wanting to pull his hair out.
I can only and see, Andrew, this is why Bud had to stop, because he has a heart problem. He can't handle that.
He should stop coming to the games.
The question is, how much of this does he want to deal with in his 60s, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
How much of this does he actually want to do? Like, does he want to do the whole, like, traveling to road games thing?
Fuck no, man.
And
Sorry.
does he want to, like, actually
recruit? 42-24, Mike. We're bleeping that.
Like there's no yeah, I mean, I might remember to do that. We'll see. I don't see him wanting to, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see him wanting to do all of that. I could see him wanting to assist because he loves Virginia Tech and wants Brent Pry to succeed, because remember, him and Pry go way back. Like, the reason Pry's at Virginia Tech in large part is because of Bud Foster. Like, the tie that Pry had to Virginia Tech was because of Bud. And he sees Bud as a mentor. And he reached out to him to help with bowl prep. And that when Brent Pry was hired, Bud's like, hey, whatever you need, anytime, ask me. And Pry is probably going up to Foster after the regular season, after the finale against UVA, and going, I need you for bowl prep.
Yep.
Can I pull you away? Christmas time to help me prepare for the bowl game? And Bud's like, shit, I shouldn't have told you that I'd do anything for you. I'd help you with anything you needed. I shouldn't have told you that. I had all these Christmas plans, and here I am now, helping coach a bunch of freshmen and sophomores that are taking their first real college snaps in a bowl game against a pretty decent Big Ten team. I did not see this coming, but anyway, here we are. But yeah, I think, if Bud wants to be involved beyond the bowl game, he'll be involved. Like, next season's too important for Pry, and Foster is a legendary coach who's been out of the game, 5 years now, 6 years now? I mean, it's been a while. So, I don't know how much of that you lose as a defensive coordinator. The game has changed a lot in the last half decade on the field, just like schematically and stuff like that. but you don't just forget how to coach, right? So I think if he wants to be involved, he's going to be there. He's going to know how to teach the fundamentals, obviously, and I think that's really, I'm sure, helped all the young guys that have gotten meaningful reps in the bowl prep process. And I think that's probably the primary reason why Bud was brought on, given the staff turnover and they're kind of a little shorthanded going into the bowl game. If it extends beyond that, it would surprise me a little bit, but if he wants to be involved, he'll be involved.
For sure. Couple things I wanted to say on Minnesota before we actually pick this game. So Minnesota goes 7-5. They didn't play a incredibly difficult schedule, but it wasn't a super easy one either. So they lose the opener to Carolina, which I think was kind of a backbreaker for them to start the year. They lose to Iowa by multiple scores. They lost to Michigan on the road by 3. They did beat USC. They spanked Maryland. Only time they scored more than against an FBS team. Only time they scored more than like 27 points. They beat Illinois, obviously, who finished the year pretty strong, and then had a good win against Shane Beamer in the bowl game. They did lose to Rutgers by 7. They had the almost upset over Penn State, losing by 1 there, and then they beat Wisconsin to finish the year. I don't know how much Minnesota football you guys watched this year, guys, but just in the little bit that I saw, this isn't a team that does, it seems like, anything particularly well. They're kind of decent on defense. They don't give up a ton of yards. They don't give up a ton of points, but they don't rush the passer well. They're not all that great on third down. It seems like they don't give up a ton of big plays, but and on offense, Minnesota has just not been able to consistently score a decent number of points. So that Minnesota is a decent team, guys, but I don't think that they're certainly anyone that can run Virginia Tech out of the building, even with a depleted roster, to be quite honest.
They're well coached. They're well coached, and the guys that they are missing, there's only a handful.
Yeah.
They're pretty significant. Like Ariante or Sari, he's going to be a first-round pick at tackle, all Big Ten. Very good player, not playing in this game.
Best defender, Lindenberg.
Yeah, Lindenberg's our best defender at linebacker. Doesn't look like he's going to play. Justin Wally, pretty decent quarter. He's probably not playing here. Minnesota's defense has been pretty good. Now, are they great at rushing the passer? No. They're good at a lot of other stuff, though. Their secondary has been good. The linebacking core, very good group of tacklers. They're very well coached. They're fundamentally sound. I've watched a handful of Minnesota games this year. It's typical, like, I know they got rid of divisions, but it's like typical Big Ten West. Like they play good defense. They run the ball well. Quarterback play depends on the week. They're happy to win the game 13-7. That's been Minnesota football this year. But the defense has been really good and has kept them in essentially almost every game they've played. Offense has been a mixed bag. Darius Taylor is a good back, but you're playing without your best offensive lineman here. So we'll see what that looks like. But with all that said, I don't think this is a game where Virginia Tech, even like down a bunch of starters, should go in expecting to get blown out. Like, I don't think Minnesota is that serious, right? But I think that Virginia Tech's in a spot here where will be a bit of an uphill climb to win this game, I think. It's a little worse than a touchdown spread. 7.5, 8 points. I don't know if it's expanded since I last looked at it 2 nights ago.
I saw 9 today.
9.5 currently
9.5.
on ESPN Bet.
Okay, so
opened at 4.5, by the way.
Yeah, that seemed low. Yeah, that. I don't know. Hopefully it doesn't turn into a surefire double-digit defeat. We'll make our picks here in a second. I don't have particularly high hopes for the outcome in terms of the final score. So I'm going into this looking at it from a standpoint of how do some of these young guys look, like I mentioned, and I'll be looking at specific position groups, and I'll be viewing the game through a lens that's a little bit different last year in the Military Bowl, I was like, let's just fucking roll them. And this year, I've just, for obvious reasons, can't look at it the same way. So it's more of a developmental game, and how long can Tech hang around, and can Brent Pry be wearing Mayo at the end of it? It's really what I'm hoping for, but not overly optimistic about.
Yeah, I mean, like, if this game was played in the regular season, I'd probably view, on a neutral side at least, I'd probably view Virginia Tech as a slight favorite. Maybe it's an even game. In these bowl games, though, so much of it really does come down to, like, how much experience are you, like, what percentage of your team is playing. And Virginia Tech is down 16 of 22 of their full strength lineup. Yeah, you're not going to have a left tackle for Minnesota, or your right tackle for that matter, or your best linebacker who's going to be a first-round NFL pick, or your top corner. But, like, the guys that Virginia Tech would have across the way to take advantage of that situation aren't playing either. So,
yeah,
it's hard for me not to look at this as a game that Virginia Tech should be considered an underdog in. Now, do I think we're going to go out and get dog walked like the 2021 Pinstripe Bowl? No. No, I do not.
would shock
But
me.
I do not
that
think
would
that
shock me.
Yes.
That would be alarming, actually, if we're being honest.
Yes.
Minnesota hasn't dog walked anybody except Rhode Island this year.
Yes. And you know, the last, I mean, and the last two Virginia Tech bowl games are two different situations, right? I think that this is truly closer to the Military Bowl last year, but Minnesota is the Virginia Tech role of more players playing. You're expecting a lot of players to come back, and you're going to build off the season, right? Whereas Virginia Tech is the Tulane role of, like, most of our key contributors are not partaking in this game.
At least we have our coaching staff.
We do have our coaching staff. That is true.
Yeah.
I don't think it's as lopsided as, like, we're throwing the ball to walk-on wide receivers. And on the Inside the Tunnel podcast with VT Scoop, Doug Bowman did some trivia with me live on the show, where he was like, who was the leading receiver for Virginia Tech in that game? It was Jaden Payout.
Oh, man.
Oh, wow. That's a throwback.
Yeah. Like, who was the leading tackler? Safety, Tay Daly. If that rings a bell.
Nope.
Vandy transfer.
Vandy, there you go. Mike McDaniel, the elephant never forgets right there. But either way, Virginia Tech, I mean, you'd hope not to get embarrassed. Like Ricky said, embarrassment would be alarming and spell very bad news for the future, potentially. But don't get your hopes up for a win.
Yeah. All right, Mike, pick 'em. Let's go.
Minnesota 23, Virginia Tech 14. 9 to 10 point loss. I think Virginia Tech's game.
That's
game
officially a
here.
Tech cover.
You know, why not? Right? Why not? I think Tech will be game here early. When you have a really good running back you're going up against that's going to have, like, most of his offensive line in front of him and 4 quarters to grind things out, I think ultimately that's going to be too much for Virginia Tech's young defense to handle here.
Yeah. As I tell everyone to rate and subscribe to the pod, I would, again, encourage modest expectations here. I think Minnesota wins and covers 35-17 is the number I'm going for here. I think Tech can hang in there, but ultimately, like, it's just going to be one of those games in a similar fashion to, like, you know, other games where it seemed like Virginia Tech was outmatched in the Brent Pry era, where over the course of the game, over the course of 4 quarters, the more talented and experienced team is just going to pull away. So, Yeah, I do think, though, that, again, if you come in with reasoned expectations, even a 35-17 loss in what effectively is an exhibition game, we could leave with some all right takeaways and maybe feel some optimism towards the future. But the offensive line is going to be a problem. I just can't see past that right now.
Yeah, give me Minnesota 31, Virginia Tech 24. Minnesota hasn't scored 30 against any FBS opponent this year. I do think they're going to be able to get over that number. That, by the way, would blow over the total for this game, which is 42.5. Give me Minnesota by 7. I think that Brosmer is going to play relatively well against the depleted secondary. I'm not sure what kind of pass rush Virginia Tech is going to be able to put together in this game. I do trust that Pop Watson can at least keep Virginia Tech competitive and be able to move the ball a little bit. Wouldn't shock me if he has 1 or 2 big plays in this game, but I think Virginia Tech probably loses by a touchdown, which I think seems to be a pretty reasonable number. One last comment before we get off here tonight. Hokie Wife 421. Bud ended up at our tailgate after Win and hung out for about an hour. That sounds exactly like Bud Foster, Hokie Wife. That checks out.
Yeah, that does check out.
Well, he can come hang out at the after party with us after the bowl game if we.
As a matter of fact, I'm willing to bet, and I'm comfortable making this invitation on Andrew's behalf. If Bud Foster, for some reason, wanted to attend Andrew Alex's tailgate before the game, Bud Foster would get an invite.
Hey, I'd take Bud Foster under the influence of alcohol over a lot of defensive minds. But on the note of the tailgate, though, because like I said, not everyone in the world, unfortunately, can come to my lowly little apartment here in Charlotte. But if you're going to the game and you're not familiar with Charlotte, right next to Bank of America Stadium on a street called Graham Street, there is a bar called Graham Street Pub and Patio that is, during the season, the Virginia Tech fan bar.
Cool.
So that's where I watch a lot of the away games. It's right next to Bank of America Stadium. So if you want to do some pregame drinks, I would recommend going there. Or if you are a beer enthusiast, this is where you might run into us as we're walking over to the game. The Charlotte Beer Garden, located on Tryon Street. A little bit of a further walk to the stadium, still less than a mile. The most beer taps of anywhere in the United States in one bar. So the most diversity. It's almost overwhelming to an extent because you have so many options. But if you're a beer guy, like PB, you got to be all over this dude. But PP, you can come to the tailgate too, honestly. But
PP will be in Charlotte. PP will be in Charlotte.
We'll have to give him a call then, see if he wants to pop by. But so yeah, those would be my recommendations. For other stuff to do, if you're sticking around for the weekend, the following day, Virginia Tech Club Ice Hockey will be playing an open air hockey game against, I believe it's Carolina, at the Charlotte Knights Stadium, our AAA baseball stadium, located right in the heart of Uptown, basically right next to the football stadium.
Andrew, that's some sicko shit. Right
Yep,
there.
and I'm going, baby. I have Andrew Batey and Jimmy Cleveland's Charlotte Wonderful Saturday all dialed up, and yeah, that would be some sicko stuff right there. But I will be there for that. It sounds like a fun opportunity. So come watch some club collegiate ice hockey and support Virginia Tech. You know, the men's basketball program ain't doing it for you this year, which if you watched the game against Duke, I'm sorry.
I did not.
We're not going to cover that. Turns out Cooper Flagg's better than the guys that Virginia Tech has.
Shocker.
They did cover, though. They covered 25.
For all of our listeners, you may have noticed we haven't spoken about the men's basketball team in a couple weeks. That is by design. That is not an omission.
I don't like
and frankly, guys,
feel pain.
Like beyond this show, like me, Mike, and Ricky are pretty much talking all throughout the week, every week. Like I do not go more than really a day without some form of conversation with these guys. And we don't talk about it either, like privately.
Couldn't care less.
that.
Honestly,
Won't.
I'm out.
Don't. Out.
Yeah.
Out.
So,
As far as I'm concerned, it's not happening.
yeah. I've had the void in my life filled by Jaden Daniels, who, by the way, for
There
those
you
of you
go.
that who don't follow me on socials, I had the chance to end my Dan Snyder era boycott, the field formerly known as FedEx Field. Saw Jaden Daniels walk it off against the Eagles to all-time ACC great wide receiver Jamison Crowder, by the way, and then I had so much fun that I had to come back the next week. One note I will make about those games: the first game I went to, it was 23 degrees at FedEx Field. That is very cold, and folks, that is going to be the temperature of the game that you are all attending if you are coming to this bowl game. So don't think because you're going to Southern North Carolina, that doesn't mean that January doesn't exist. It does exist down here. It's very short. This is actually colder than it will normally be. But dress like you're bundled up because this will effectively be the same weather as that UVA game, if any of you experienced that a few weeks ago, which I'm sure many of our listeners did. So dress warm.
Yeah. Boys, we set out to do this in 30 minutes, and we doubled it. Rate, review, subscribe. We'll certainly have a recap pod maybe sometime this weekend, depending on our schedule, to kind of go over this game. We'll certainly do that live, have a little bit of fun, and then we'll do maybe a post-mortem later on after that. Anything else, guys, before we wrap this up?
Enjoy the game, folks. Again, Virginia Tech football, win, lose, or draw, still always, like I called it before, a cultural phenomenon. It's great to get the fans together, and the season might not have been what you thought it would, but the bowl game gives you a chance to get together with your crew one more time if you're choosing to do that. So, Clark, we'll see you Friday. And Izzy. Can't leave Izzy
Absolutely.
out. She texted me that I was being rude because I just mentioned Clark. No, Izzy, you're coming too. It's a package deal. You guys are married.
Yeah, I kind of assumed that was the deal, right?
You're authored in. Izzy, that's how that works. Yeah.
Well, hi, thanks for listening all year. Appreciate it. We'll see you after the bowl game. We'll see all of y'all after the bowl game. Until then, go Hokies.